Well, thanks very much for being here. Lucky to have the two of the CEOs of our water portfolio companies at VODA and FIDO. Maybe Mitch, if you could start and just introduce yourself, well, what you've built at FIDO, and what technology you have in the market.
Okay, so hi, I'm Mitch Donnelly. I'm the CEO of FIDO. FIDO have been around in the market for the last 5-6 years now, and we develop AI and hardware technology solutions, sensors, that support water networks to detect and manage and size leakage within their network. So we know that globally there's a problem with leakage. 35% of water across the world leaks from networks before it ever gets to a consumer. FIDO's technology helps networks to understand where that is by taking acoustic data through our sensors, and our AI interprets that, removes background noise, removes interference, and gives a very accurate both location of the leak and a sizing of the leak.
George?
I'm George Demostenos, CEO at VODA.ai, and what we do is we have a SaaS platform that assesses the condition of pipes and identifies risk for water engineers that are trying to find risk in underground assets. This includes solutions like risk modeling for mains and service lines for potable and wastewater systems. It includes identification of lead and galvanized service lines for inventory buildup, and identifying meters that have inaccuracies and may be stuck.
So both of you are sort of at the bleeding edge of the technology that you've developed and kind of deploying that into the market. But this is a market that's very regulated in terms of the procurement pathways. It's a highly specified market, which in some ways means it's like a third customer in the conversation that you have to adhere to. So maybe George, talk to us a little bit about your experience going through that procurement process. How are you talking about your technology to someone who may not have experience with your technology or isn't necessarily that tech forward, in a way that you're sort of earning trust, allowing them to really understand what you're doing in the context of maybe how they're used to buying products for their water network?
Yeah. Procurement in the water market is tough. For us, typical sales cycle is anywhere between 12 and 18 months. And there are many strategies that we've experimented with to lower that sales cycle, but procurement remains one of the biggest challenges we have. One of the things that we've done is our go-to-market strategy has been maintaining a lean sales team and direct sales team, and having channel partners to help us sell. Now, when a channel partner sells, they might bring you a deal. Once they told you, within 30 days, they bring you the deal and book it, which brings the average sales cycle down to 6 months or even lower. But at the end of the day, someone has been speaking to the utility for a while. So that's one. The other piece is that this is AI, and AI, at least when we started back in 2017, was something that everyone wanted to hear about, but no one was sticking out their neck to say, hey, we're going to pay first, we're going to try it first. Now it's much easier. We have tried and deployed an approach where we, instead of doing pilots and then having to resell again to the utility, we have what we call risk-free trials, where the utility signs up and we deploy the system, and we say, okay, if it doesn't meet certain KPIs, you don't have to pay for it. And that has helped us bring down the overall sales cycle from the beginning until they sign up for at least 1 year. And then the third thing that we have tried is what we call land and expand, where instead of going in and trying to do the entire system, we tell the utility, why don't we stay right underneath your procurement budget limits, so that you don't have to wait a full year until you can budget for this. Let's start now within 90 days, and we'll start with a smaller system and then expand it a year later. So those are some of the approaches we've taken and tried. They're all working in different levels, and we hope that the overall sales cycle over time will continue to go down.
Yeah, I mean, with such a fragmented market of utilities all over the world, everyone's got their own way that they want to work with products, the way they want to be sold, whether it's their workforce, a partner's workforce. So I guess the flexibility makes a lot of sense to get your foot in the door and, to your point, then expand from there. So Mitch, same sort of question, with leak detection, I kind of alluded to, you've got a field workforce that you need on board, and you're also doing this in the larger context of we want people to go fix the leaks that you're going and finding. But yeah, I mean, what's the conversation like for FIDO on those procurement processes?
Every day in water procurement is a new and different challenge. I agree with George. These are long sales cycles. They take deep relationships, but we operate across multiple geographies. So FIDO are working with customers from Europe. So we're working across the UK, in Spain, in Greece, right the way across the US and out into India and into Australia and the Far East. And every customer has a different challenge around procurement. Everybody has a different appetite for how they want to procure, for what they need to understand. Each one will have their own pattern, their own buying cycle. The one commonality that they all share is that they're quite slow and they're very risk averse. And so actually we take a very similar approach. We have a lot of direct sales capability. We do work with channel partners as well, but land and expand is big. And I think one of the kind of advantages we have is our ability to scale. So our equipment, particularly the kind of hardware and the sensor deployment, actually can start at very small volumes. So we have the ability to de-risk some of that, to manage around budgetary constraints, to become a real proof point. There's a challenge across water procurement and water buyers in non-revenue water everywhere, which is around pilots. Everybody loves to run a pilot, and it's part of this understanding and getting the feel for the product and understanding how it works. One of the things we've successfully done at FIDO is start to push those pilots actually out into, we're in this geography. We have a network that's the same as yours. It may be your neighbor, it may be a few cities away, or it may be a kind of neighboring district or different network, where we can demonstrate our effectiveness on the same materials, on the same pumping systems, on the same networks to consumers by bringing them in. So we land and expand, but we use the customers that are deployed, that are working with FIDO as advocates for our product, and they will demonstrate and they will talk on our behalf quite often as well. That really helps us get the message across.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I guess the channel partners have a blessing and a curse. I think in a lot of cases they've got great relationships with the customer trusts them, and I think this is a customer that places a lot of value in the trust factor when they're selecting a new vendor or supplier. Having consistency in what's being delivered is really important to a municipal customer that's responsible for an entire community of people. But I think, as you both know, it's having a channel partner is not sort of offloading the sales effort. It's just kind of a different type of sales strategy. And so curious, what do you guys do to train up your sales partners, make sure that they're good sales partners? If there's anything that you do to sort of monitor the quality of those channel partners, on a frequent basis, because I think you'll always be the expert in your product and understanding how it fits into the customer experience. But that's sort of knowledge that you need to transfer to your channel partner, so there's still a good steward of your technology when talking to a customer. But similar to figuring out the procurement paths and how's this technology going to work in the current paths to a customer. Same thing for a channel partner. Like, what do you think is the best way to work with those groups and hold them accountable?
Yeah. So channel partners, especially large corporations, take some time to convince, if you will, that you're worth their time, because they look at so many companies that started with AI, especially the last few years. So just getting the channel partner to sign up with you, I think is a great accomplishment. But every company has different drivers. Understanding those incentives early is super important. Setting up expectations between the two companies is very important. And also understanding that not every channel partner will operate the same way. Some of them will only be able to give you leads because they have deep relationships, but they may not be as tech forward in selling your solution all the way. Others may have that capability, but they may not have the robust sales force that those guys with the leads that bring you the leads. So it really depends what the drivers are and how they can help you. And setting upfront those expectations and what success looks like is important. The most important lesson we've learned over this is what is going to bring more core sales to that channel partner. For example, if a company, a large corporation does, say, $20 billion a year in revenue, and a much younger company is happy with $10 million. Well, that's great for the younger company, but the larger corporation will be looking at something like 10% of their revenue to increase. And in that case, they're going to allocate so many more resources to you. So understanding how do we help them too become successful, and having a channel partner manager, all those things are important.
Yeah. For you, Mitch, you've certainly got a number of stakeholders as you come to market, but how are you managing those partners?
I think selection is absolutely key. Selecting the right partners for cultural alignment, for market alignment, for understanding the product and for their technical capability. There is nothing more important than selecting the right partner who is going to sell your product remotely into a geography where we don't have presence. So before we go into an agreement with a reseller partner or a channel partner, I want to be absolutely clear that they're aligned to FIDO's model, that they understand the technology, that their approach in working with us is going to be effective. It's what we are looking for, that they share the same values and the same intentions. Otherwise, it can go very wrong. The most valuable thing that we have as a business is our reputation. It's our brand. And trusting somebody to sell that, the language that they use, the commitments, the material that they produce, is a big risk. There's a really, really big risk that the wrong channel partner can close down a geography. They can close down a whole country's worth of market just by going out with the wrong approach, with the wrong data, with the wrong price points, with the wrong style. So selecting those partners for us is not a quick activity. It's something that we put a lot of time and effort into. And we contract really tightly around that because I think you have to. So you have to be very clear about what is the marketing material? How do we share that? Because once you've gone into that relationship and you have that arrangement kind of finalized with a channel partner, you actually can't just leave them to go sell. It becomes a full-time relationship. It becomes a big effort. It becomes a big amount of time that you have to sink into that relationship in order to get value. So, I mean, you mentioned, Chris, training, for example. You know, we will put a lot of time into training our partners, into supporting them. We'll attend conferences with our channel partners to make sure that they're getting the exposure, that they're getting the full value out of FIDO's marketing and FIDO's brand presence. If you don't put that in, they're not going to be successful. So it's a big effort, but it's potentially a very, very big reward.
Yeah, no, it's I want to believe that water entrepreneurs are like mountaineers. You climb one mountain, there's just another mountain for you to climb. And so you can go through finding the right channel partner, and you go through the procurement process, and then the next mountain is integration. And then you have these other sets of questions around data stewardship and, you know, where is my data? How can I organize it? And you go through this integration process. Maybe kind of talk about, you know, when you're talking about the data topics with customers, however their concerns come up, or when they've already decided to buy the product, but they want to understand how the integration process, how are you continuing to strengthen that customer relationship, not just for trust, but I mentioned every utility is a little bit different, but you want to understand how they're going to use your product, so that you can kind of facilitate a customer success operation that retains that customer. But anything you guys are doing, as far as the integration process that gives the customer a lot of confidence in the product you've built, and perhaps the just the infrastructure you've built on around the product.
Yeah. Data for us, I'm sure for Mitch too, is very, very important. Data quality. But increasingly, utilities are very protective of their data as well. So setting those expectations in advance as to what are the standard data requirements, what files will we need, what integrations will we need, is important. When we first started, we would onboard a customer, and the data exchange process would be the longest process of the onboarding, which was several weeks. We worked really hard the last couple of years and now have automated over 90% of that. Not only that, we have turned over control to the customer where they can set those up on their own. They can load up their data, they can connect their data, they can get through a cleaning process, which is powered by our AI engine we call Da Vinci, and it will give them exception reports to say, hey, this is what you've uploaded, this is what's great, this is what's missing, this is what you should be working on. And as a result of that, they also get cleaner data that they can then go back to their other systems and update.
And but for you, Mitch, I mean, you're creating a new data set in one way for customers, but you also need some data from the customer, to have that work just as well.
So yeah, we absolutely do, and I think the phrase George will recognise is critical national infrastructure. Water companies in particular will always talk about their data as being critical national infrastructure, and that they're very sensitive. Each market has a different set of requirements, particularly around data sovereignty. US data around GIS, so the kind of network mapping, must stay within the US. We find the same in the Middle East. We find within the European Union there's some flexibility, but it's limited to within the European Union. So we have to host in multiple different locations. We apply standards like Cyber Essentials, the normal kind of ISO protocols, but there are always questions around what will you do with my network data, how will you store that, and so things like how long do we keep the data, what do we do with it, where's it stored. There's a lot of assurance that goes in from a customer perspective in the pre-contracting phase. That's always a question they have. Typically then, actually, because we're collecting data from a network, so we are deploying sensors that attach to assets that listen to sounds coming across the pipe. The next question that almost immediately comes from a water utility is, well, what can you hear? Can you hear conversations? Can you hear what's going on? And of course, the answer to that is, well, no. We're taking a very, very small 3-second snapshot a couple of times a day, and it's specifically around that pipe, so we don't get that level of data. But then what happens to that data? And the answer is the data always has to belong to the customer. That is customer data. So the performance of their network, what's going on, is data that belongs to them. So we're very clear that we ring fence that. We have agreements around training, that we can train our AI using the output, but we don't keep the individual data itself once it's been through that process.
That's very interesting. We go through the same challenge where utilities want to own their data, and that's our promise to them, that it's their data, but we still want to train our AI engine, because with every data set, it needs to get smarter. So the way that we've approached this says something to the effect of, we will take your data, train our engine, but make sure that your data is not mixed with others. This is one of the biggest concerns they have. Will my data show up somewhere else? Yeah. So as long as we are upfront with that, most utilities have been very open in letting us use their data and continue to train our engines.
Absolutely, and clarity is the key. I think we're exactly on the same page, that being really clear with customers about what we do, how we use it, where it will be, and actually adapting that model as well. So adapting that, whether that's hosting locally, whether it's excluding certain parts of the network. Sometimes we operate in very sensitive sites. We've operated on US military sites, in naval bases. We have to be very, very clear about what we record, how we use that, and what we do with it at the end of the project.
Is there anything that needs to be demystified around this data topic? As we go around to conferences around the world and people talk about data and security, you both haven't had much friction around that topic. I mean, it sounds like you've got a great framework and a great product and, really robust infrastructure to support the technology where it gives people a lot of, confidence. So Mitch, I'd maybe start with you. Just that anything that you hear a lot around the industry that maybe is just not as much the experience that you're having as you deploy your technology in the market.
I think there are a lot of misconceptions around AI and how AI performs, and people typically base their understanding of AI on their own use. So they'll base their understanding of AI on ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude, and they'll use that as their reference point for what they believe our AI may do. So we get a lot of questions about things like, well, will it will it hallucinate? Will this hallucinate sounds? And actually, that's not how this type of AI model works. It's not a model in the sense of ChatGPT, for example, which has a semantic layer, which is looking at language patterns. This is looking at a very, very specific use case, so it doesn't have the ability to think wider than that use case. So there's quite often a sort of dispelling those types of myths around what does this do, what is the risk around false positives. I think the other kind of big challenge that I'm always try to be really, really clear with customers up front is, particularly in the initial part of a deployment, failure can be a positive. Because if you're trying to train a model to understand the performance of your network, you don't just need good outcomes, you also need bad outcomes. The model has to get things wrong from time to time in order to learn. That's how you train AI models. You can't just train on perfect data. You also have to show it when it's wrong for it to be able to develop and for the model to become more accurate. And different customers really have a different approach to receptiveness on that. Some will say, well, I want this to be perfect from day one. And it's not going to be. It will be accurate, and maybe it's 80-90% accurate. But actually, the more feedback you give and the more feedback you give on the outcomes, when you've got to look for a leak, if there is no leak, you feed that back and it will become, every one of those sort of learning experiences will make it become more accurate. So it's setting that expectation up front. Certainly some customers actually really understand that intuitively, and they'll come in and say, I'm great. I completely understand that for the first month or so, it's going to be improving, and we're happy that it's training because it will learn the sounds. That's exactly how this type of AI solution works.
Very interesting. You mentioned that we're seeing similar things. It's all about setting the expectation up front that this is what you should expect. In our case, we're in a way a little bit lucky because we take past failures that they've already had in training. But you're right, the more failures that come in, positives and negatives, the better the model becomes. And we've started now to show that with data from other utilities, this is what it looks like, and you can see the improvement over time, which has been really helpful. But for us, especially large utilities, they ask us for a lot of data security questions before they sign up. In fact, we talked about procurement being one of the biggest challenges. The second biggest challenge, I would say, are IT teams. Now, they're doing their jobs, and it's fair, but there are a lot of security questions that we have to answer. So last year, we've spent the large part of the year working on cybersecurity. We've gotten our ISO certification, and that has made the conversations a little bit easier. We still have to, from time to time, answer some questionnaires, but having that batch of ISO cybersecurity has been helpful.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if you have the right accreditations, you can provide your certificates up front. You bypass a large part of the questions or the challenge that you get. But I couldn't agree more with you, George. I think the biggest hurdle after procurement is IT teams. It's this is our data. This is sensitive. Where is this going? How do we know that we can trust you with this? Getting through those questions, and then of course getting into contracting, where you start to look at liability limits and how do you manage the risk of failure. And actually the data that we take is incredibly well managed, and we're very clear about what we use, and we only take data that we need, but you still have those challenges right the way through into contracting as well, and risks and damages kind of clauses that will go in.
This is, we were talking about channel partners earlier. One of the benefits with channel partners, especially if they're a large company, because it's their liability, they might prime the deal. That sometimes is helpful because there has been the relationship between the larger company and the client, plus when they see the big name being in the front, even though we have all the insurances and everything else as well, can be very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as one of your channel partners, we really appreciate that. I mean, that's one of the core tenets of our business. I mentioned is the trust that we have with our customers. They know what to expect from us and the quality and consistency of our products. I think we've been really lucky to work with both of your companies because you're working with our customer for the first time, someone we've known for decades, but very quickly establishing the same level of trust that we've built up over that long period of time. I think you both have built products that you kind of feel that immediately from the user experience, and then it's supported by teams that also kind of exude that that element to our customers as well. So maybe just on that, like I mentioned, CRH is one of your channel partners. Feel very fortunate to be working with you both. I mean, we are excited about how our water business is growing, but there's a lot more for us to do, and I think that's really going to be led by innovation. It's going to be led by a digital experience, and I think what we've been putting together with Civil Sense. But curious, what attracted you guys to CRH? Why did you want to work with a global partner? We're in many different types of infrastructure, materials, and markets. But just what was so interesting about CRH as a potential partner that you wanted to work with us?
Yeah. So CRH is one of the largest companies in this industry and the largest company in other industries, and sitting on the S&P 500 now. So just partnering with a large corporation where they trusted us with their capital, and partnering with between us and Oldcastle, for example, that on its own has some value to us. But CRH has also provided leadership coaching to us, provided workshops for each department to help us fine-tune our engines, departmental engines. And the Oldcastle partnership is bringing us sales, and each booking is a material to our enterprise value. So capital is important, but all those other things are very helpful.
Yeah. How about you, Mitch?
I think for us, pre our Series B raise, CRH was one of our largest customers and largest trading partners, and it was a natural progression to move and to move into that Series B investment. And CRH brings, as George said, a huge amount of connects. The CRH portfolio companies are very open to working with us. I think the relationship being part of the CRH portfolio opens doors and connects to us to be able to expand and develop, but also creates a network of people that have broader skill sets across the sector, across water, and actually also across materials and construction, for us to be able to call on and pull information on, partner with, and co-develop solutions. So I think there's a real value in the relationship overall for me.
Yeah, I mean, we've really appreciated the partnership. our customers' needs are evolving. It's not enough for us to just offer a product now. There has to be a product and a way to manage that and inspect it over many years, because our customer life cycle could be 50 years on a certain product. Almost all of that is a product spent underground that we can't see, and don't have a connection to the customer. So I think what you're building has allowed us to sort of maintain relationships with the customers, do what we do best with our core products and materials, and you're offering a completely behavior changing product to our customers, which we've all seen the benefits for. So really appreciate both of you being here and spending time together. We're lucky to be investors in FIDO and VODA, and looking forward to many years of success to come.